Hello, my name's Ben Thrash. I'm an extension entomologist for the University of Arkansas Division of Agriculture. And today we're going to be going over how to scout for plant bug pests in cotton, which is our #1 insect pest in Arkansas. So our recommendations for scouting cotton for plant bugs, we generally start the year out using a sweep net. So pre-bloom, we scout cotton with a sweep net. And that's because at that time of year, there hasn't been any adults that have migrated into the cotton field in order to lay eggs for those nymphs to hatch out and start feeding on the cotton. So during pre-bloom, we are using a sweep net to detect those adult plant bugs. Adult plant bugs are much easier to pick up in a sweep net than they are on a drop cloth. They're a lot more mobile, and so using a sweep net enables you to actually capture those adult plant bugs quite a bit better. Plant bugs, they have over 250 known hosts that they feed upon, and you know, during certain times of the year, especially during the summertime, a lot of those alternate hosts, like weeds in the ditches, corn, they migrate out of those crops, migrate out of those weedy hosts on the sides of fields because, you know, it dries down during the summertime. And cotton is an irrigated crop, and it's one of the only green things out there for those plant bugs to feed upon. And so that's why a lot of plant bugs move into cotton during that time of year. So our threshold for pre-bloom cotton on plant bugs is 8 to 12 tarnished plant bugs per 100 sweeps. And that doesn't mean you take 100 sweeps all at the same time. We'll take 4 sets of 25 throughout a field. And if the field's a larger field, you may end up taking more sets of sweeps than that. On smaller fields, you might only take 4. But it's important to sample multiple areas in the field because plant bug densities can vary across the field. If you're up next to corn, for instance, a lot of plant bug adults will migrate from a cornfield into cotton. And if you have, for instance, a 200-acre cornfield, there may only be 64 rows or something along the edge of that cornfield that actually needs to be treated, whereas the rest of your field may not be at threshold for plant bugs or may be extremely low and can actually wait until the next scouting period to actually be treated, which can eventually end up saving the grower money by not having to spend money going across his entire field on insecticide as well as plane cost, application cost associated with that. Again, I will mention that this cotton behind me that you just saw me sweep is way past the point of when we typically use sweep nets. Remember, this is pre-bloom. This cotton is near cutout or right at cutout. So it's a lot farther down the road than we would typically use a sweep net, but I'm just showing this for demonstration purposes. All right, so after you do your sweeps, you're gonna wanna open up your sweep net and you're gonna get some of that trash out of the bottom of this. So a lot of it's just leaf material you collect from doing your sweeps. Remember, you're not wanting to just completely destroy the cotton plant. We call people that hit the cotton plant too hard weed eaters a lot of times because they'll just tear the plant up. But also, you don't want to just not have any leaves in your sweep net. You want to have a moderate number of leaves kind of in your sweep net because that indicates that you are hitting this plant hard enough to collect your plant bugs off of it. But I generally stop. I'll drop my net down like you see here, and I'll shake some of these leaves off and I'll toss them out until I get down to, you know, a lower level of leaves down here in the bottom, a lower level of fodder. Then I'm gonna bring the net up like this and I start looking through what's left. See, there's a plant bug adult right there. I like to flick them out of my net so I don't count them twice. There's another one right there. That's 3, 4. There's 5. 6, 7. And remember, you're going to be looking for nymphs in here too. We're primarily focusing on adults, but there will be nymphs if you do have heavy pressure. And sometimes you see them smashed in there, like this one is smashed to a bloom tag. You see one larger nymph right here crawling. There was another adult. So I'm going to keep going through here and count the number of adults I have. Now, most of the time, if you're a consultant, once they get to threshold, they're probably really not going to count long past that. If you think about it, our threshold's 8 to 12 per 100 sweeps. So on 25 sweeps, really that translates to 2 to 3 that you're going to get per set of sweeps. So per 25 sweeps, that's 2 to 3 plant bugs. I'm all the way up to like 12 already. And so I'm way past the point of having a threshold level of plant bugs. So really, in order to save time, once you kind of reach threshold, you just kind of move on to the next location. So post-bloom, we swap to using a drop cloth, and that's because there's a lot more nymphs present in the field at that time after the big adult migration pre-bloom. We generally recommend post-bloom, but you may break out a drop cloth a little bit earlier in the season if you start picking up nymphs in your sweep net. Now, our drop cloths are 2.5 feet from end to end, and you want to sample all the cotton within the length of that drop cloth. So if you sample 2.5 row feet on the right side of the drop cloth and 2.5 feet on the left side of the drop cloth, that ends up being 5 total row feet. And that's what all of our thresholds are based off of. Our current threshold for plant bugs is 3 tarnished plant bug nymphs per 5 row feet. And you know, it actually varies. If we end up dropping our square retention below 80%, we will actually reduce that threshold to 2 plant bugs per 5 row feet in order to get those under control and increase our square retention. Squares are the major part of the plant that we're trying to protect from tarnished plant bug. Squares are the flower bud of the cotton plant that eventually turns into a boll, which produces our lint. So if we lose too many squares on that cotton plant, we end up losing lint, which reduces our yield out in the field. Now, our recommendations are that you need to maintain at least 80% square retention. Once we drop below 80% square retention, our yield really starts to drop off pretty quick. So it's important to maintain at least 80% squares on that plant in order to maximize your yield. So the way that we scout for square retention is we look at the 3rd node down from the top of the plant and we check for the presence or the absence of the first position square. Now generally we'll look at 25 plants within a certain area of the field. So in the same spot where you sweep for plant bugs or you do shakes for plant bugs, do drop cloth samples for plant bugs, we'll also look in that same general area for square retention. And so we'll look at 25 different plants and we'll check for the presence or absence of that first position square from the 3rd node down from the top of the plant. And it's easy, it's pretty simple math in order to determine what your square retention is. For instance, if I'm missing 5 squares on 25 plants, then that's 80% square retention. Because if you multiply 25 by 4, that's 100, and you multiply 5 by 4, that's 20. 20 minus 100 equals 80% square retention. Another important concept to understand is last effective bloom date. And this is important because a cotton flower has to have 850 heat units in order to turn into a boll, a mature boll that's going to turn into lint. And once we get past a certain date in Arkansas, for instance, in North Arkansas, it's August 8th. In South Arkansas, it's August 21st. That determines the time that a flower has a 50% chance of actually having enough heat units to turn into a mature boll that's going to produce lint. So once you get to those termination dates, really any flowers or squares that you have left on the plant are not likely to actually turn into a mature boll. And so it doesn't make any sense to spray for plant bugs on past those dates in order to maintain square retention. At that point in time, you're trying to protect any bolls that are left on the plant. As we talked about before, 250 heat units past cutout. So how we check square retention is we're looking at the first position square on the 3rd node from the top of the plant. Now, in order to count these nodes, I start at the first unfurled leaf. I would say this leaf is still furled up, so it is not completely expanded. This would be my uppermost expanded leaf. So this would be considered node 1. The next leaf down would be node 2. And then this node is the third node down from the top of the plant. So that's where I'm checking for the presence or absence of the first position square. Now you can see this, it has two squares on it. It's got a first position and it's got a second position square, which is behind the first position square. Now, since this square is there, we count it as present. But if that square was missing and that second position square was there, we would still consider this a missing square. We're always looking for that first position square, not the second position. So what I'm showing you right now is an example of feeding from a plant bug on a square. So on the left, we actually have a dirty square, and on the right, we have a clean square. You can see evidence of plant bug feeding by the yellowing and discoloration of this square over here on the left side, whereas over here on the right side, you see how it's still clean and white. So whenever these petals expand from this square, these ones will still be clean and white, and these ones will have been yellowed and discolored. What happens is that a plant bug can feed on these, and it can impact pollination of that flower once it opens up, which that can impact the number of seed that you have the number of seed that you have in the bowls. And where does lint originate in those bowls? It originates from the actual seed. And so if you have fewer seed within a bowl, then you're going to end up having less lint per bowl, which is going to negatively impact you at the end of the year by having just an overall lower amount of lint per acre. So whenever you come to an area of the field that you want to sample, it's important not to disturb the plants that you're about to shake. So you want to approach the area, get your drop cloth, slide it up under the plants that you're about to shake. Try to disturb them as little as possible. And then you're going to bend the plants over. As we say, you want to shake it, don't break it. But then you're going to shake those plants vigorously over the top of your plant. Now you notice whenever I did that, I was not actually beating the plants on the drop cloth. That's important because if you're actually hitting the plants on the drop cloth, you could be smashing the insects that you're looking for or knock them off of the drop cloth. So right after I shake one side of the cotton, I'm going to go through and I'm going to start smashing the plant bugs as I count them. So I make sure that I don't count any of them twice. I count all the plant bugs on one side, and then I move over to the second side. I bend the cotton over again. Once again, I'm not beating it actually on the drop cloth, just above the drop cloth. And you want to shake those plants vigorously. If you don't shake them hard enough, you're really not going to knock those plant bugs out of the plant. They get underneath the squares, and if you don't beat them hard enough, then they're not going to fall out onto your drop cloth, and then you're not going to capture a true amount of plant bugs that are actually out there in the field. So it's very important to do that.